Hey guys, Jay here. So it's been a while since I've actually had the 1528 towers from Arendal, their new flagship tower speakers. And you guys know how much I loved the Arendal 1723 THX loudspeakers. Those speakers won the Best Value Speaker Award 2 times in a row on my channel. And they still remain as my reference point for that $3,000 to $4,500 price point. So when I heard that they're coming up with a new line of speakers, I was definitely interested because I've already seen what they can do with the 1723 THX tower speakers. I would imagine that the 1528, the new flagship towers, would be amazing. But what I didn't expect was this. This speaker is just an absolute masterpiece and it makes me absolutely speechless. There's a lot to go through in this video, so let's get straight to it. Now, being completely honest, when I first heard that Arendal was going to be releasing a new flagship series, I wasn't all that excited because, again, we're talking about a higher price point, and I already thought the Arendal 1723 THX was a great sweet spot. I mean, it's been my reference point for 2 years now and has been a great speaker that I highly recommend to anyone, and virtually anyone that has gotten those speakers are very satisfied, including myself. But when I first got these speakers in, I knew immediately setting them up that this was a different ballpark. And yes, we are talking about a $9,500 US speakers for the pair. But what's important to realize here is that yes, the price is up there, but for $9,500, from all my experience of working at the high-end retail store to getting all these speakers in, high-end speakers, budget speakers, any speaker that I've gotten here up to this point, and that's a lot of speakers, I can't express how this feels, but this is an absolute bargain for $9,500. Again, not refuting the fact that it's not a lot of money, but I feel like every cent that I pay for that $9,500 price point is worth it. But that's just my opinion. Let me explain and you can draw your own conclusions. First of all, it's important to realize how big these loudspeakers are, even in comparison to the Arendal 1723 THX loudspeakers, which was a lot of speaker for the money. But this speaker is 56.3 inches tall, 18.5 inches wide, 21.6 inches deep, and weighs 174 pounds. So to put that into perspective, that makes the Arendal 1723 THX loudspeakers, once again, not small speakers, not small tower speakers by any means of the imagination. In comparison, the 1528 tower speakers make the 1723 THX loudspeakers look small. This is a big loudspeaker, and that is important as a start to understand that, because when you get to that tower size, you're talking about a different scale of sound, different scale of dynamics, and a different scale of extension. So if you're asking me right now, before I go into any of the technical details, is the 1528 tower speakers twice as good as the 1723 THX? Normally, for every other brand speakers, usually the diminishing return kicks in really hard, and the answer is no, it's better, but not 2 times better, right? In this case, it's way better. It's not even 2 times better than the 1723 THX. This is way better. I mean, like 3-4 times better. Now, once again, the size of the speaker has a lot to do with that, but that's not everything. Starting with the drivers, the tweeter on this speaker is absolutely special. It is using a lithium magnesium tweeter, which is not commonly used in the hi-fi industry. It is a very light, durable material, and this 28mm tweeter has a material density that's about 1/3 of a beryllium dome tweeter. And of course, with high stiffness like a beryllium dome tweeter as well. And according to Arendal, they are using a large copper short ring and a substantial neodymium magnet motor. Again, I can't express how special this tweeter is. Now, I'm not a fan particularly of metal dome tweeters, beryllium dome tweeters. That's not my jam. But this tweeter is very light and it is very quick and very, very refined. And I will say, just from the sonic standpoint of what I heard with these loudspeakers, is probably the most refined tweeter that I have ever heard. And that goes for Magico, for Cal, any of the metal dome tweeters. I've never heard one that actually pleased my ears. And to me, this sounds like a perfect balance between a soft dome tweeter and a metal dome tweeter. It is so refined and smooth and detailed at the same time. It's hard to explain. It's like, there's no fatigue or harshness, but there's so much to love about this tweeter. And I usually don't talk about my subjective opinion when it comes to the technical portion of my videos. But I just had to put that out there that this tweeter is so special, both technically and sonically, because it's a very special tweeter that you don't see often. And this was not by mistake. I jumped into a Zoom call to ask about the driver choices with Arendal, especially that lithium magnesium tweeter. I was interested in learning more about it because, it's not widely used. And they told me that not just the tweeter, but all the drivers on this loudspeaker was chosen after careful consideration after trying many drivers in the market. So none of these drivers were chosen by accident. Everything was chosen after long testing, both technically and subjective listening. And so this 5-inch carbon graphene cone mid-range driver was also very carefully chosen. The carbon layers are not woven like a typical carbon cone, but instead using long carbon fiber strands. They are mashed together in ultra-thin layers within the graphene, and this gives the cone a random breakup behavior which avoids known resonances. And honestly, even with high-end speakers, when it comes to that mid-range driver, I feel like it is often overlooked in comparison to mini monitors, which use high-quality mid-range drivers because, again, that mid-range and high frequency is the target for those mini monitors. So to give you an example, the Charisma Audio Caprice loudspeakers that was in the Toronto Audio pre-show that I did recently has a similar woofer design as this speaker. And that mini monitor is retailed for around $6,500 because once again, it's a very high quality mini monitor using exceptional drivers. Again, something that you don't see in tower speakers often, the attention to the driver quality that you see here is astonishing. Now, this speaker is $9,500 for a big ass tower, using a driver that would be used in a high quality mini monitor that retails for like $6,500. So again, lots to be impressed about this loudspeaker. Now, in terms of the woofers, while it may look similar to the woofers in the other 1528 series loudspeakers, it is not. It is specifically picked for this tower speaker, which according to Arendal, they added massive amounts of copper in the motor to reduce distortion by a lot. Even in comparison to the 1723 speakers, they are half of distortion amount. And there's 4 of these per speaker, creating amazing, just incredible extension and dynamics from those high excursion drivers. Now, I'm truly excited about this loudspeaker. I mean, how can I not be? In fact, I don't think I've ever been this excited about a loudspeaker that came in here, like ever. Not like this. But I know that my excitement can come across the wrong way sometimes, and I promise you and can confirm that Arendal has not sponsored this video. But we do have a sponsor for today's video, and that is Soundcore. Soundcore is introducing their new Liberty 4 Pro, their new Bluetooth noise cancelling earphones. And the real cool thing about this earphone is that it has 7 sensors so that it adapts to the environment every 0.3 seconds. This essentially allows this earphone to have seamless noise reduction in whatever noisy situation you may be in. And actually, one of these 7 sensors is a pressure sensor, so that when you go on flights, on airplanes, this reduces noise up to 178% according to lab results by Soundcore. It comes with this stylish charging case that has these touch bars and display to fine-tune the level of noise reduction with the touch control. But also, other plethora of adjustments can be found to fine-tune the sound to your preference on the app itself. My personal favorite was the Hear ID test, which plays a piece of music and then lets you choose between two options to fine-tune the sound that you're looking for. And this really elevated my experience with these earphones, especially for the launch price of only $130. And to celebrate the launch of the Liberty 4 Pro, Soundcore is offering some extra goodies with the purchase of the Liberty 4 Pro for the next 3 weeks, from October 3rd to October 24th, 2024. To learn more, make sure to check out the link in the description below so you don't miss out on this special deal. Now back to the video. Now, it's not just the drivers that's special on this loudspeaker. I wouldn't be just excited about quality drivers. In fact, everything about the speaker is designed with great intention and executed perfectly. This speaker has an elliptic shaped waveguide on the tweeter to help with dispersion, but also the off-axis response, so that wherever you're listening in the room, it has a great even sound. It has a wide sweet spot. And I found personally this to be the case because as I was walking around in the room, off to the side, the center imaging was spectacularly intact. And this is something that I made aware to you guys when reviewing really high-end speakers like the Saltado speakers from Russell Fiorentino. I noted how the center imaging was locked in place and didn't move even though I was moving around in the room. Wherever I am in the room, it didn't matter, the center imaging was dead locked in the center. And that is a quality that you don't see with every speaker. You only see it with select speakers that have great dispersion pattern and also really amazing off-axis response. And what that means and why it's important for some people is that if you have multiple rows of seat, for example, in a home theater setting, then this wide sweet spot of the speaker allows the listeners, multiple listeners, wherever they're sitting, to have the same kind of quality sound that they're hearing out of these loudspeakers. And even if you're a single listener like me, you can benefit from this since, that dispersion disperses the sound evenly into the room so that it's not beaming at you, especially those high frequencies can be nasty if it's beaming straight at you. And this waveguide helps to disperse that so that there's no beaming, there's no harshness, and it's dispersed evenly throughout the room. And that helps with the refinement of the tweeter. And that's what I'm hearing with the speaker, is that it's extremely refined in those top frequencies. And of course, the tweeter has a grill, which is a nice touch to protect the tweeter from any wear and tear. But according to Arendal, this grill also helps to increase sensitivity and lower distortion, especially in that 7 to 15 kilohertz area, which is that upper mid-range frequency. And this is going to become very, very relevant when I go into my sound descriptions, because that upper mid-range is, as you know, critical when it comes to that shrillness, that brightness that you may hear sometimes with loudspeakers. And because of this behavior of the grill, it helps to refine those upper mid-ranges, and that's going to be very, very relevant in that sound portion once again, so keep that in mind. Now, according to Arendal, the motor on the mid-range was so large that it was not possible to just screw it into the wood directly. So instead, with the tweeter, they mounted it onto a steel plate that you see here. And of course, this allowed Arendal to keep the tweeter and mid-range close in its acoustic centers so that the sound that's coming out of the mid-range and the tweeter arrives at your ears at the same time, which is another aspect we'll go into when we talk about the build quality of this loudspeaker. Because spoiler, the shape of this loudspeaker is not by accident. Now, the grill on the mid-range driver is just for protection and just aesthetics to match the tweeter and the rest of the design. It's not for acoustic purposes, like in the tweeter, because in the mid-range, it doesn't have the same effect. And talking about grills, for the woofer, you don't get just a traditional ugly grill. In fact, you get a steel grill, individual steel grill with a rubber backing. That is just astonishing quality for $9,500. Like I said, it's a lot of money, but I've never named one speaker that has steel grills with rubber backing for individual woofers. It's nuts, and these grills are high quality. And again, it matches the aesthetics of the rest of the grill design. Now, one thing that is clearly different from the 1723 THX series is that on this loudspeaker, the ports on the back is non-existent. In fact, the port is at the bottom of this loudspeaker. In fact, it has a very big port that I can't quite show you because, again, this speaker is really, really big and hard to flip over, so there's no way I can show you that. But it has a big big hole, and it comes with this big foam to plug that port at the bottom if you wish to make the speaker into a sealed design, which you can do to mitigate the bass and help with that slower roll off. But this port design makes it a lot less sensitive to room placement, especially in terms of bass. But also, this port, along with the 4 8-inch drivers per speaker, it really allows the speaker to extend low with authority, truly hitting like 20 hertz in my room like no problem, like no other speaker has ever done. And once again, this port was designed with great intention. Again, I can't show you inside the port, but there are many things that's done to the port to fight resonance, but one of them that I found interesting is that they have small holes inside the port that's filled with damping material to fight port resonance, so that you can crank up the speakers really high at really cranking loud volumes in a big room, and there will be virtually no port noise that can intrude into your music. So once again, incredible attention to detail, even the port that you will never see. And what I really like about these speakers' feet is that it's rubber, so no more spikes on my floors, even though it's completely ruined at this point. And of course, these feet are designed for vibrational purposes to keep the resonance away and control resonance and all that. But it's also highly adjustable, so it's actually very important to adjust the height of these pucks in the setup process. Because as you can see, these have a really interesting front baffle design that is separated from the cabinet itself. And actually, Arendal has sent me a whole, page worth of information on how the front baffle was made, but it's a painstaking process. That's all you need to know. It is just meticulously crafted. And there's a good reason for it. Now, this front baffle helps with resonance as well, but primarily it is for time alignment so that the drivers come at you to your listening position at the same time. And if one thing I learned over time is that we are very sensitive to our timing of sound. And my background is actually in neurosciences. I do neuroscience research as a research fellow. And one thing that I have continuously found and learned is that we are very sensitive to timing cues, and we can tell once again from snap here to snap here, we're able to tell that very quickly and very well. So that displacement of sound becomes very important. And sometimes this is fixed in the crossover and so on, but mechanically time aligning the drivers with the front baffle shape on this loudspeaker so that it arrives, all these drivers arrive at the same time, helps for phase coherency and really helps with the overall fidelity of the sound, making everything that's coming out of the speaker, even though it's big towers, sound very coherent like a true small mini monitor would. And of course, because a lot of drivers are being used on this loudspeaker, it helps to use less parts for the crossover when you're time aligning like this. And the crossover parts used here is exceptional, using polypropylene caps for the tweeter and mid-range and large polyester caps for the woofer, wire wound resistors and aluminum heat-sinked wire wound resistors, and of course, high quality air coil inductors. And for those of you that care about the crossover parts, but also other parts in the signal path, you'll be pleased to find out that the Arendal speakers do not have any ferrous magnet material in the signal path. So there's no steel nuts, none of that. And Arendal says that they took an extra step here because they wanted to make sure that there is nothing in the signal path that can smear the sound. They wanted absolute transparency and clarity to the sound, and because of that, they wanted to make sure that there was no ferrous magnet material in the signal path. And just like their 1723 series of loudspeakers, the binding post that you see here on the 1528 is a rhodium-plated copper terminal that is high quality. And most importantly, easy to use. And in the back, you'll actually see these jumpers to adjust the high frequency and the mid-range. This will adjust the high frequency and mid-range by plus minus 2 dB. And of course, this helps to adjust the speaker's high frequency and mid-range to your room, but also your taste. And what I personally found interesting is that even these small jumpers are made out of pure copper and then plated with rhodium for longevity. But unfortunately, I didn't personally get to play around with this as this feature is currently disabled on this loudspeaker. It will be enabled for the pairs that you buy and you receive. But this is a final prototype version that I got early, so it didn't have that feature yet. So overall, through and through, you can see quality here, there, everywhere you look on this loudspeaker is just quality oozing out. And once again, the price point of $9,500 is a lot of money, but once again, the both speakers, the pair is using HDF as the cabinet material for the entire thing, including the front baffle. That's a lot of HDF. This is a gigantic speaker. And I mean, where can I possibly find a speaker like this that is made out of HDF? We saw HDF being used in the 1723 series, and all the reviewers, including myself, was astonished by that fact. But here, I mean, the sheer size of this thing, and they're still using HDF. I mean, that is dedication. And for $9,500, tell me a speaker that is this big, this humongous, that is using HDF and quality materials with nothing left unchecked. I think my excitement here is very justified, and if you see the speaker in person, you will definitely agree with me. Now, in terms of sound, this speaker is absolutely bonkers. It is just incredible. It blows a lot of the competition out of the water. I mean, the sheer size for the price, the quality that backs it up as well, is really hard to beat. I mean, this speaker really is a disruptor, and I'm reluctant to use the word giant killer in this because of the price point, but still, this is right there with like 20 grand, 30 grand speakers that I used to sell at the high-end retail store. It weighs as much. It has quality materials and build quality, the drivers just as much. And perhaps the only possible explanation that they can do this is because they're direct to consumer. And usually for a business model like this, I would throw in the fact that, you can't really demo it yourself at a dealership, so it's a con. But in this case, as you know, Arendal has a 60-day risk-free trial for all their speakers, including this one, which quite frankly, I don't know how they're doing this with this gigantic speaker, because even just the packaging for the speaker is extensive. Anyways, the point being here is that in terms of being able to demo the speaker and try it out yourself is very easy, and Arendal makes it easy, and that's one thing I love about Arendal speakers. Now, there is a con with the speaker in that you do have to have the room. It's a big loudspeaker, right? Let's use some common sense here. It does need room. In fact, my room is too small for this room, quite frankly, and I will talk about the limitations of my room, but in terms of the speaker, I can see it sounding so much better in a bigger sized room. And one of that reason is because of that front baffle design. Because it's time aligned to arrive to the listener's spot, Arendal recommends about 4 meters away from the speakers for an optimal listening spot with this loudspeaker, with a minimum of 2.5 meters away. And I was sitting about 3 meters away, and I was still blown away. I didn't even personally get to experience these loudspeakers in the room that it was meant for, because my room was too small for these, but I was still blown away. This loudspeaker has so much potential. I can see it sounding so much better in a bigger room, so keep that in mind as you listen to what I'm about to say about the sonic qualities. First, setting up these speakers in my room, the first thing that I noticed wasn't the bass. I expected the bass to be good. It's a big tower speaker, but what I didn't expect was the soundstage. Now, if you remember, my main concern and my main complaint with the 1723 THX Tower Speakers was that, as great as that speaker is a big tower speaker, so it sounded a little bit restricted in the soundstage in my room. But with the 1528 Tower Speakers, even though it's a bigger speaker than the 1723, much bigger, the soundstage is grand. It is atmospheric. It is expansive soundstage, both width and depth. This reminds me of a soundstage coming from a huge Wilson audio speaker, soundstage that I hear in really high-end speakers I've set up in clients' rooms before, $500,000 tower speakers, humongous tower speakers. And that's the kind of soundstage you get with this loudspeaker. The soundstage is massive and expensive. I can't express that enough. And that's in my small room that is not really even meant for these speakers. I can't even imagine the soundstage it will create in a bigger room that is meant for. And of course, there's the bass dynamics. I mean, I'll go over this very briefly, but the bass dynamics is impressive. The extension, it goes down to 20 hertz in my room absolutely without even, breaking a sweat. I think that's expected considering the drivers being used here, as well as the port with this humongous construction of a speaker. But because it's a big speaker, there's something called scale, right? I always talk about the scale of sound that you get. And that's just physics, right? It's a sound source coming from a much bigger speaker than a tiny little mini monitor or a small slim tower. So the scale of sound, the pressure of that sound, not only makes you feel it in the chest, in the bass, but in the vocals, in the mid-ranges. You hear it with bodily sensation. And that is something that I experienced with high-end speakers, like $500,000 Wilson Audio speaker setups for clients, right? When I sit in their spot, testing stuff, that's the sensation I get, right? That sheer bodily sensation, not just in the bass, but across all the frequencies, especially in the mid-range as well. And that is the scale I'm talking about. This sounds like a pure concert. The pressure, the excitement, the grit, the powerfulness of the sound that's coming through the speaker makes the speaker sound humongous, a huge source of sound, and it makes the scale enormous. And that is an experience that you just don't get from small speakers. And yes, the Arendal 1723 THX Tower Speakers did have that in the bass especially, but this has it in the mid-range and is a bigger scale of sound than even the 1723 THX. It's not 2 times bigger, it's even more grand. And that's the sensation I get with these speakers, is that it actually has a scale even bigger than the size of these speakers suggest. And that is something to be said. This is a big loudspeaker, but it even has a bigger scale that reminds me of speakers that I heard that's even much bigger than these speakers. Those $500,000 Wilson Audio speakers I'm talking about, or Focal, or Grand Utopias, big speakers, flagship speakers that you would put in a big mansion. That's the kind of scale I'm talking about. And because of this grand scale of sound, it's almost impossible to compare to speakers in a similar price range, or any speaker, regardless of the price range, that doesn't have this scale coming from a big loudspeaker. And the bass is clean and fast, but it's not so clean and so fast that it feels like it's stripped of musicality. It is just fast enough to where you feel like, oh yeah, that's fast, but it is so clean at the same time and extends linearly. There's no bloom like Sonos Faber speakers that you may like, or other speakers that has that bloomy characteristic. It doesn't have that. You can add that with EQ, but by the speaker's nature itself, it doesn't have that. It extends very clean, linear, so you get this very clean attack and decay that is just on point in my opinion. If I ever heard perfect attack and decay, not too fast, not too slow, I think this is perfectly it. You probably heard it too, but manufacturers tell me all the time that they made their drivers so that its stop time is perfect. Its stop and retract time is perfect. But with these speakers, you really hear that. It's just absolutely perfect. It's not too mechanical again, so that it doesn't feel like it's stripped away of the musicality, but the attack and decay structure is just on point. Again, reminds me of a high-end system that I set up for my clients. And when I say high-end system, I'm really talking about not just the speakers, but like Dan D'Agostino amplifiers and the whole thing that makes the system sound like that. With these speakers, I'm not even using gear at that level. Of course, these are amazing gear for the money that I absolutely love. They're my references, like the RX 2 preamplifier and the AGD monoblocks. But by no means are they a $250,000 monoblock amplifiers like Dan D'Agostino's. So we're definitely talking about a minimal setup, compared to those kind of high-end setups I've set up before, but I'm getting the similar kind of sonic quality, and if I dare say, perhaps better in some ways than a lot of those other loudspeakers I heard at the high-end retail store that I've experienced. And namely, again, it comes back to that high frequency presentation. Now, you may recall that with the 1723 THX Tower Speakers, I heard the Wilson Audio Sabrina X at the time, and then came back and then heard and set up the 1723 Tower Speakers, and then I was like, I actually prefer the high frequency on these speakers, but a lot of the qualities were similar. And I came back home and I set up these speakers and I listened to them, and my God, the similarity is so close that I feel like Wilson Audio should be afraid. That story remains, but the 1528 series, the high frequency is on another level. The detail is incredible. It's a hyper detailed tweeter, meaning there's every nuance, every detail, every breath, every space can be heard on this loudspeaker. However, it is not bright whatsoever. It is highly refined to a point where the edges are perfect. It is just crafted. It feels like I'm grabbing each high frequency and tailoring it to an absolute refinement, the edges. I can't explain it. It's airy, it's sweet sounding at the same time. It is just absolutely amazing refinement on this tweeter. And again, that high frequency presentation really makes the experience just that much better with a large tower speaker like this. I was raving about the speaker to a close friend of mine who's been on Audiophile for like 35 years. And he was here and he was listening to these speakers with me, and he described it to me this way. He said, "Jay, this speaker sounds like a mini monitor, that somehow defied physics and extended to 20 hertz, no problem, with pounding bass. That's what this speaker sounds like," is what he said. And I agree. That's actually a really good explanation. It has the coherency, the imagery, the spectacular phantom center and imagery and soundstage of a mini monitor, but it has that pounding bass that you would expect, the extension that you would expect, the textures that you would expect from a tower speaker this size. And one of that quality is that mid-range for me. Vocals is extremely important for me. As you guys know, the acoustic guitar, anything in that mid-range is something that I really enjoy listening. So mid-range presentation is extremely important for me, so is tonality. Now the tonality on the speaker is mostly neutral, but the background is so black, it's so quiet, it's so clear sounding, it's very transparent. And dare I say, one of the most transparent speakers I've heard that is so alluring to me is the Platimon speakers that I'm using as my reference right now. And dare I say, these tower speakers have similar, comparable transparency in that mid-range and high frequency. It is so addictive how transparent and, just pitch black with vocals coming out with sweetness, not brightness, but highly refined sweetness. And that is something, again, that I associate with mini monitors. It has an amazing mid-range and high frequency quality and tonality to it. This speaker is not just about the bass. And actually, because of this transparency and the sheer dynamics of this big tower speaker, the contrast between micro and macro dynamics is exceptional. So from the quiet parts of the music to the loud parts of the music, the contrast is amazing. It is able to handle those big dynamic swings with great authority and great oomph. You hear every track with bodily sensation. And I'm not just talking about bass tracks, I'm talking about vocal tracks, acoustic tracks. You feel it in your body. You feel that guitar string zing come across your body like it slices through you. This is an experience you can hear if you go down to a high-end retail store and hear big Wilson audio speakers. You know exactly what I'm talking about. That kind of sound is something I've never heard under $10,000, like ever. It's not something I even imagine ever happening in this industry. Overall, this speaker's overall presentation is neutral and is very clean, transparent, a great attack and decay, like I said. It's a very properly designed loudspeaker, great for home theater, but amazing for two-channel listening in my personal opinion. In fact, I've never wanted to buy a house and have a bigger space than now, just to buy these speakers and set them up, because my room is too small to justify these speakers. Not to mention that they're so big, so it will be impossible for me to move around by myself. But again, because it's so big, I wasn't able to take measurements of my own with these loudspeakers because I have to measure the port, I have to flip it around, and I need help for that. So I wasn't able to take the measurements yet. I'll post my personal measurements later, but we have the measurements from Arendal and they tend to match my measurements pretty well. And as you can see, it's plus minus 2 dB, meaning that across the entire spectrum of the sound frequency, it does not deviate away minus plus 2 dB. That's straight up studio quality right there. Now, as you know, I'm not always happy about flat frequency responses. Sometimes a speaker can measure with flat frequency response, but can sound flat, dull, dead sounding, clinical. And sometimes they can measure flat and sound amazing and musical like this speaker, and Kalish Model 5s as well. But with this speaker, what I found particularly odd was that in that upper mid-range, you can see that it's like plus minus 1 dB. So it's very, very flat. And personally, I'm not a fan of this type of frequency response usually. Personally, I found that I prefer a speaker that has the upper mid-range slightly recessed, kind of like the Platimon speakers that I'm using as my personal reference right now. Makes sense, right? And the reason for that is because for my personal enjoyment, again, if we're talking about studio, we're talking about, something entirely different. For studios, I want flat. I want it to be perfectly flat, but for musical enjoyment, I personally like a little bit of recession on the upper mid-range because that's the region that I'm sensitive to, and I tend to get brightness fatigue, with vocals being a little bit too forward. And that upper mid-range, the high frequency, the extremes, that doesn't really matter. That adds air. It's that upper mid-range area that makes the high frequency a little bit bright, aggressive, forward sounding to me. But with these loudspeakers, perhaps because that tweeter is so refined, like I said, I don't find it harsh whatsoever, like I do with some other speakers that measure flat or neutral. I find that this speaker, while it has amazing flat frequency response, the high frequency is super refined. And this goes to say, once again, the driver choice, the materials do matter, the quality crossover and all these type of things do matter in the tuning process, because once again, this speaker measures completely flat, plus minus 2 dB, but it sounds absolutely amazing, musical, with cleanliness, transparency, dynamics out the wazoo, with incredible refinement in the mid-range and high frequency. But yeah, I will be posting my own measurements, including the off-axis measurements later on my community page. But I just thought I would point that out there because, according to the Arendal measurements, it's measuring completely flat even in that upper mid-range, which is something that I usually don't prefer. But that's not what I've heard, subjectively speaking. Subjectively, I find this speaker again to be super refined in those high frequencies, upper mid-range, bass, and the dynamic swings with layered sound staging, with incredible depth and blackness and quiet background, with incredible expansive sound stage. Is a speaker that really, again, reminds me of a really high-end, expensive loudspeaker that I used to sell at the high-end retail store that I experienced all the time. And that experience, brought smile back to my face. It felt like I was working again at the high-end retail store, especially pivoting the speaker around, setting it up, with being meticulous about the setup and all that kind of stuff really paid off. This speaker is just absolutely amazing. It's a true high-end speaker, and I can't imagine a better speaker at this price range. In fact, my current reference standing at this price point right now is the Borresen X2 and the Rosso Ferentino Soldado 2. And the Arendal 1528 Tower Speakers easily replaces the Borresen X2 in my reference list. And I usually limit 2 speakers per category, and that's why I had to remove 1. And the reason I removed the Borresen X2 in place of the Arendal speakers instead of the Rosso Ferentino is because the Rosso Ferentino speakers, once again, is more specialized. It's a warm speaker that has incredible detail and a slim tower that can fit into a lot of spaces. And of course, while the Borresen X2 is an amazing speaker that looks great, again, it's a much smaller speaker, like much smaller, like 1/3 of the size compared to these monsters right here. And it does cost less. The Borresen X2 costs $8,800 US. But again, comparing the two, I personally think there's no comparison. All things being equal, these speakers are just sheer monsters that bring scale and dynamics, that bodily sensation and soundstage and imagery that's just impossible for the Borresen X2 to be compared against. So again, I love the Borresen X2. I think it's a great loudspeaker, but it's going to be replaced in my reference list with the Arendal 1528 Towers. And again, that does not mean that the Borresen X2s are bad speakers. It's just that the Arendals provide something here that I personally feel like deserves a spot in my reference list at this price point. And in fact, considering all things, even my other speakers, even in the higher price points like the Metal version 2s or even the Joseph Crowley speakers, the horn speakers with incredible bass dynamics, do not come close to the scale and dynamics that this speaker provides. So if you're comparing just dynamics and just the overall quality of the build for the money, I mean, this speaker is like top tier of this list. But once again, I'm going off each price category as my reference list. This speaker, in my personal opinion, does compete at a different price category entirely. And being offered here for $9,500 per pair, I think is just absolutely insane. Absolutely insane move by Arendal. Now, one thing that you should be aware of with this loudspeaker is the power requirement. While I didn't have any trouble powering these speakers with any amplification in my personal room because it's a smaller room and these speakers are huge as heck, these speakers are 89.5 dB in sensitivity opposed to the higher sensitivity, a slightly higher sensitivity of the 1723 tower speakers. So while a tube amplifier is not out of the question, again, this speaker is a nominal 4 ohm impedance loudspeaker. So while it will be okay to power them with AV receivers in home theater settings and generally with most amplifiers, including tube amplifiers, I would recommend a high quality amplifier that your money can buy after doing your research, because this speaker, once again, is a high-end speaker, truly like high-end speaker, right? So giving it really good power, it rewards you heavily. Everything in your signal path is transferred. This is a transparent loudspeaker. So the more quality you give, the quality gear you give, this speaker will take on that characteristic and give you back in spades. And I can't express that any more seriously. It's very, very serious that you give quality to the speaker as much as possible, because this speaker will scale, and it scales like crazy. I've tried amplifiers that I truly love, and I went through my paces with them, and every single time I throw in an amplifier that is higher quality, in my books, like the AGD monoblocks that I have, it just gives me more and more and more. And all this is to say, I just want to be honest and transparent with you guys. I don't feel like I gave the speaker its full justice. Usually when I review a speaker, I feel good because I feel like I did it its full justice. I went through this painstaking setup process to make sure the setup is perfect, and then pairing, go through multiple amplifiers I have to get the right pairing, all that kind of stuff. But with these speakers, I can see its potential being so much better in a bigger room, with better amplification, high quality Accuphase, Luxman, big tube amplifiers, what have you. I wanted to listen to the speaker with so much more, and I feel like this speaker could have even taken to another level, even more impressive than what I'm hearing right now. And that's what truly gets me even more excited. And I know that a lot of you have been waiting for my impression of these speakers. They've been teasing it on the Arendal Facebook page for a long time now. And I will just say this: whatever you imagined or expected for the new 1528 series, it exceeds them all by 10 times in both build and sound quality. And at this price, I never have seen a bigger disruptor in the speaker industry. I usually never say this, but the competitors should be very, very scared. And I'm not just saying that to prop up Arendal, which they do deserve because it's an amazing loudspeaker. This is incredible for this price, but in hopes that other manufacturers will see the value being offered here for this price and be more competitive, so that we see more speakers like this at this price range. Because in my time of reviewing hi-fi loudspeakers, I have not seen such a disruptor, such a quality speaker, such a big tower speaker being offered at this price point. Never have I ever. This is an incredible loudspeaker, and I hope to see more speakers like this from other brands as well. So with that, I hope this video was helpful, entertaining, and I'll see you guys on my next video. Make sure to subscribe. Until next time.